I'm Shelagh Leahy. I'm a family physician in Yarmouth, Nova Scotia since 1976, except for 2 years. When I turned 50, I took a year off and traveled around Australia, and when I turned 60, I traveled around the world because I wanted to recharge my batteries and come back re-energized to be a family doctor again. Most people who are beginning the practice of medicine rather than being students of medicine have natural apprehension and a little bit of fear about starting a business. And often they avoid that whole process for some time doing locums and so on. But when it comes down to the crunch of starting your own family practice, you are actually starting a business. And you haven't been trained to do that. You've been trained to be a doctor who takes care of people and helps them when they're ill. And you need really to develop some skills and train to run a business, to learn how to hire staff, how to make an income, how to do things according to the rules of the road. It all makes sense, and of course a person would be nervous and they'd be a little worried and they'd be excited too. A new physician, when they're starting to think about developing a practice, has to know themselves, and they have to know what are the things that are important to them. Often there's a work-life balance issue. They want to be able to have time dedicated to work and time dedicated to their personal life and their family. They'll need to be in a community that is supportive and that needs their services, not in a flooded area that has perhaps too many doctors. They think about these realities, but perhaps they don't think about the realities of the business, which are that you need to see a certain volume of patients to make enough money to enjoy the work-life balance and to fund the lifestyle that you hope to achieve. So we're trying to inject perhaps some information into their decision-making process that will give them some balance to make good decisions that will address all their needs. To get off on the right foot in your practice, you really have to understand what group of people you're providing care for. Often you're being asked to come into an underserviced area where there's a huge need for physicians, and everybody wants you to be their doctor. So the practice can grow, but set limits at the beginning so that you can get a little control around that piece. The second piece you need to get organized is how will you run your practice, because it is a business, and so you need to develop policies within your own head about how you will run your practice, how many patients you'll see a day, how long will each patient be seen, how will you sort out who gets seen first, what will you do in emergencies, what will you do if things run late. There are all kinds of practice situations that you've witnessed as a resident, but you haven't really had to deal with them as the final arbiter, as the person who makes the decisions. Once it's your own practice, there is no resident preceptor to guide you. You have to come up with your own philosophy about how it is that you're going to run this business. There are a wide variety of practice options that physicians can choose from. Some people choose to be solo practitioners, and they're their own boss, and they hire their own staff and are totally in charge of their practice. More often, people are in collaborative practices. They are joining in one sort or another with other physicians, perhaps other physicians plus nurse practitioners or other healthcare professionals. So it's important up front to understand, if you're going in with a group, what are their policies? Can you be comfortable with them? And if so, are they going to change without you being informed, or is it collaborative truly? Often a lawyer will give you some advice, and you can have a contract that may be offered by that group, vetted by your lawyer, just to be protective and to be clear that everyone understands what the rules are. So when you're thinking about developing your practice, you have to think your first step is, do I need to hire staff? Sometimes that's already taken care of if you're going into a group practice. More commonly, you have to develop your own staffing department, and you have to develop the philosophy of how will the staff work with you and your patients. And we have to remember the staff are key. They are the face of the practice, and they're the voice that the patient hears when they call. Rare is the physician who answers their own phone. So that person who is your staff face of the practice needs to be aware of what your philosophies are. They need to understand how you want to book the practice and deal with patients. They need to have that same vision of how to be respectful, courteous, ask very personal questions without being insulting, and to ensure that the patient feels a sense of trust with the practice and trust the information that they provide will be handled with great care. Of course, these people don't grow on trees, and there are many, many people who would love to work in a family doctor's office, but perhaps don't have the right skill set. You want to check with the folks who work in your area already to see, so what does a staff person in a doctor's office usually get paid? It often depends on what their duties are. Are they answering the phone? Are they taking histories? Are they doing paperwork? It all will then flow into what are the negotiations you'll have with that person about their potential salary. It's not, every practice is unique. Many people hire family members to do some of the components, but even their salaries have to be within a reasonable range. And it's important that that is all clear and that there's a process for regular review. At the beginning of your practice, often you have a large group of people who have a lot of information they need to share with you. And then, of course, there will be follow-ups that arise from those initial visits. So it's important to think now, how much time will I set aside for my first visit with a patient who will be in my practice long-term? And how much time will I set aside for a follow-up? And to make sure that your reception staff know that and that your patients know that. So they won't be expecting to come and spend an hour with you and tell you every concern they've ever had. And often there are little templates you can use that patients can fill out in the waiting room. And then you can say to them, I'm going to be seeing you again in 2 weeks to follow up on the lab tests I've ordered, and we'll spend about 15 minutes going over all of those. And if you have other concerns that you feel are important, we will see if we can fit that in. So you want to give the same message and educate your practice. You want to educate them so that they don't have unrealistic expectations and that you can run the business of medicine efficiently. You can see 2 people in a day and you will make $60, which won't pay your staff. Or you can see the usual 30 or 40 patients that most of us see in a full day, and you will be able to have a reasonable income and support the practice that you've just opened. Right from the beginning, it's important to educate your staff and your patients about how the practice is going to work most efficiently and to be good value for them. So you want to tell people at their first visit that they can expect to meet back with you again to go over reports and to have follow-up of their regular problems, and that will take probably 10 minutes, 15 minutes. If they have other issues that they want to address, they may want to schedule another appointment, or they may want to incorporate them into that visit. And as long as we stay within a reasonable length of time, we'll try to address all of that. But you want to make sure that's a useful visit. You want to make sure you've understood them, that they've understood you. They are going away with a clear message of what's to be done in follow-up, and that they really did understand the words that you used. That's a lot to ask of a 15-minute time slot. And so in order for them to be successful with that visit, they need to understand the rules. If they're coming expecting that you'll spend an hour or 2 hours with them and really get down to everything on their list, which might be 20 items, it's an unrealistic expectation. It's not fair to you, the other people in your waiting room, and it's really not fair to them. Most people can only remember 2 or 3 key messages after an office visit with a doctor, so try to keep it to that. The really interesting thing is that people spend a lot of energy making sure that their office runs well and that they see people on time, but the only way they make any income from that work is to bill accurately. So the 2 things that I saw happen in my practice were I forgot to bill for things that I did that I should have been paid for, and that I would bill incorrectly. So it's really important to think of the work that you do as tasks that can be billed. You can bill for insured services to MSI, and they will pay for a bundle of things that you do, such as giving immunizations to well babies and doing pap smears, and you want to make sure you capture all of that. Most physicians don't do their own billing, so it's your billing clerk or your staff who do the work, but you are ultimately responsible for every single thing they do. If they do it wrong, if they do it incorrectly, that money will be taken right back from you by the government. The other source of income for a physician is non-insured billing, so it's not coming from the provincial government, it's coming from the patient or a third party. Perhaps an insurance company wants you to do a full physical and documentation, and you send a bill to them. Or the patient wishes you to give you an immunization which is not covered by the provincial plan, so they have to pay you to give that service. A lot of physicians are uncomfortable billing the patient directly, and they forget it or they don't bother, and they lose perhaps a couple of $1,000s a month. And if I asked you to take that $2,000 and burn it, you wouldn't. So why should you not think more seriously about these non-insured services that you have every right to bill? Huge responsibilities that we have a physician is often we have to share with the patient some news that they would perceive as being very bad. And we must do that in a structured, organized, respectful way. This is not news that should be shared on the phone or casually dropped like a bomb at the end of a visit. We need to be thoughtful about who is going to support the person when you share the bad news with them. We have to recognize that when they hear bad news, it's going to stun them, and they're not going to remember too much else, and they're going to be quite upset and perhaps not able to cope as well with getting out of the office and home and following your instructions. So I often think about scheduling such interviews with the patient at the end of a session so that I have a little more time if things go long. I want to make sure that they don't walk out into a crowded waiting room crying and upset, because obviously then that is no longer a private interaction with me. I want to make sure, if at all possible, that they have somebody with them so that they have the support and that cooler mind that can help them cope with next steps. I want to make sure that when they come in, they have a chance to feel that they're safe and they're in a place where they're going to be supported. And then I review with them how we've come to have this appointment, and perhaps they've had some diagnostic x-rays or biopsies and I now have the result. I often ask them, how do they like to receive news? Do they want to have all the details, or do they want to have everything summarized in a quick way? Because everybody has a different style. Some people want all the paperwork, they want copies of everything, which they're welcome to have. Other people want just the bottom line. And so once I understand a little bit about how that person likes to receive news, then I share it with them in language that I hope is appropriate to their level of education and medical expertise, or just scientific information. And then I repeat it. And then I often will give them a copy of the information, or perhaps patient information about that subject that may be perhaps simpler to read or understand. And then as a final piece, I ask about questions that they may have, and I schedule another appointment. Because when somebody has just told you, for example, that you have MS or you have breast cancer, your brain really stops listening and you start going into the what ifs. So you need to come back and ask your questions at a time when you've had a little processing time under your belt. The phone is probably one of the most important tools that a physician uses. Most of our patient contacts come through the phone, calling for an appointment or with a question or an emergency. And most of our news that we need to get to a patient goes by a phone. Increasingly now we can text them as well as phone them, but we have to have philosophies about how do we handle messages coming in and going out. We need the staff to be really well trained to understand confidentiality and privacy. And we also need to have patients know that they will be asked personal questions and they may have to share, but it'll be handled in a very courteous and private way. And we have to do the same thing as physicians. When we call out, we can't leave voicemail messages that tell too much. We can't leave voicemail messages that can be listened to by other people. So we perhaps, when we register the patient, or regularly when we have possibility of needing to contact them, should check with the patient and say, how do you want me to get back to you on this? Do you want us to schedule an appointment? Do you want me to leave a message on your phone? Should I send you a text? And there are some practices even who use email communications, but they're not as common, and they have quite a few problems related to them. There are 5 things that I look at on a regular basis to see if I'm on track. So I look at, what are my billings? Am I billing for everything that I do, and am I getting paid for everything that I bill? And then I look at, what does it cost me to provide the services that I'm doing? So I look at, what's my monthly overhead? How much does it cost to pay my staff and all the associated deductions that I have to pay for that staff member? I look at my number of patients seen. How many people do I see in a day, in a week, in a month? And then I can sort of, over the course of a year, expect a certain amount of income. I look at how long does it take for a patient to see me. So do I have weeks before there's an available appointment, or can they be fit in that afternoon? And the last thing I look at is no-shows. What percentage of people just don't come for an appointment that I have scheduled for them? Because that is lost income. So there's some tools that have come about really because of the advent of technology in healthcare that have really made a big difference for us. The commonest one we're all familiar with is the electronic medical record. And I've been using that now since 2006. It gives me a much more legible record, a record that is much easier to prove what I did should I ever be audited. It gives me a record that's much easier to search. It doesn't ever get lost. So once you have an EMR, you do not ever spend a half a day searching for a patient file that's been misplaced in the back of your trunk. You have that sense that you have a very private record because nobody can break into your office and rifle through the paper. No other patient can get into the record because it's all password protected. So an electronic medical record is a real boon for many reasons in an office. It doesn't necessarily make it possible for you to see more patients a day, but you see them more efficiently and you see them with a much better, more comprehensive health record. You can actually improve things a little further if you're a non-typist by using such things as Dragon dictating systems, which once you're trained by Doctors Nova Scotia staff or others, really make it easy to enter information into your medical record. There's other technology that really saves time. There are automated blood pressure monitoring systems. You wrap that around the patient's arm and you leave the room. The patient relaxes, you get more accurate readings, and you're off doing something else that will earn you an income during that time. So really, we have to look at how can we operate our offices smarter, and it doesn't all have to be our personal information. We can have a continuing care aide, for example, doing all our vital signs so that we don't have to be spending time that's perhaps worth $150 an hour when we have a well-trained person getting paid $20 an hour doing the part of the job for us.